Hey, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to the Hanging On to Hope podcast.
I'm Brenda J.
And I'm Karen Wonder.
And we are hangingontohope.org.
This podcast is intended as educational and is not psychological or medical advice. Always consult a professional when needed, and we disclaim any liability in connection with the instruction, information, or advice given.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Hanging On to Hope podcast. This is Brenda J. Today, we're excited and honored to have Nycole Wilkins back on the show. Nycole's first podcast was episode 12, where she tells her story, but so much has happened since that recording. Nycole had a double mastectomy 2 days later after we recorded that. She then guest starred on episodes 100, 101, and 102 if you want to take a listen. Since then, Nycole went in for reconstructive surgery, and they discovered what they thought was scar tissue was invasive cancer. She's just started chemotherapy, which will be followed by radiation. Not only has it been a tough time physically, but the emotional toll has been so difficult. Nycole's going to talk a little more about that in a moment, but before we start, let's give her a proper introduction. Nycole's a friend and former Southwest Airlines coworker. Nycole has an incredible story and years of education and experience in the field of abuse. She has a Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology, worked as an outpatient mental health and drug and alcohol counselor, worked in a locked sex offenders facility for ages 10 to 21, and did mental health case management in the community. She also worked in an adolescent psych hospital, and she has a blog on Instagram which talks about her healing journey. It's very inspirational and encouraging. So welcome back to the show, Nycole.
Hi, Brenda. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, great.
Hi, Nycole. Thank you so much for coming onto the show again. Do you mind starting out by sharing a little more about how you were doing and what you've been going through?
Well, thank you once again, ladies, for allowing me to be here with you. I always have such a great time coming on this podcast, and I like to always say thank you to you two for keeping this podcast going. I think you don't realize sometimes how much you're helping people and what ways you can be helping them. And just me being on this podcast today is helpful to me and therapeutic to me. My life since April 10th has been a bit of a roller coaster. I like to call it an emotional roller coaster. I went in for surgery, reconstructive surgery on April 6th. And there was an area that I discovered in January that the doctors all thought were scar tissue. However, they did a biopsy when I went in for the reconstructive surgery on April 6th, and I found out April 10th that that area was invasive breast cancer. So this has just been a lot to handle emotionally, mentally. I almost feel like I'm in a bad dream and it's time to wake up, like it's not reality, especially being that I got a double mastectomy 2 years ago. I had non-invasive breast cancer, and I got that double mastectomy to avoid ever having invasive cancer. So the chances that this happens is rare, but it does happen. And for some reason, I happen to be amongst that small percentage of women that this has happened to. I'm still trying to process all of it. I had my first chemotherapy treatment last Wednesday. My second one is coming up tomorrow. It's been a lot to process, but I'm trying to just remain positive and just focus on getting better and getting through this. And that's exactly what part of this podcast is about removing stress and recognizing needing to protect your peace. That's been my big theme since April 10th, that anything or anyone that disturbs my peace, I really have to remove that, because in order for me to get through this 12 weeks of chemotherapy and then a month of radiation, and then I'm going to have to continue for a year of some immunotherapy as well because of the type of cancer I have. It's difficulty to look at the journey that I have ahead of me, but because of my faith and a big army of family and friends that I have that are so supportive, I know that I'll make it through. So thank you, ladies, for having me here today. This is therapeutic to me, and I hope that this podcast is also going to help somebody else.
Yeah, I think you're going to encourage a lot of people because, I mean, it's so common these days. So I think your voice is really going to be heard.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for sharing that, Nycole. What we thought we would talk about today is how stress and abusive and toxic relationships negatively affect your physical, mental, and emotional health. Also, how self-care and having balance in life are so important. Nycole, did you want to talk about stress and toxic relationships and how they've affected you?
Yes, I can certainly speak on that with the current situation I'm going through. Like I said just a few minutes ago, my theme has been all about protecting my peace, and there have been people and situations in my life recently that I have had to cut out of my life or have less contact with them because I realized right now you're kind of in a fight. You're going through chemotherapy. Chemotherapy basically kills every cell in your body. We want the cancer cells to be killed, but it kills the good cells as well. So you are in a fight, and when you're in that fight, you need positive people, and anyone that's going to bring down your spirit or anything, they need to be removed. And I slowly realized that I have difficulty with that because I tend to be a people pleaser, and I want to be good to everyone and keep them in my life. And how could I have less contact with someone right now, especially this vulnerable part of my life that I'm going through cancer? But I had to realize that sometimes you have to be a priority, and self-care does not necessarily mean that you're being selfish. And I think that's something that is not talked about enough. People just assume that if you are exercising self-care, you're just being selfish. You're just worrying about yourself. But this is a time in my life where if you want to quote it that way, then I need to be selfish because I need to have all the strength that I need in order to make it through the treatments. And I need to be surrounded by those positive people to help me through that. Some of the other stressors I have are, of course, financial stress. This was supposed to be my last surgery, the reconstruction surgery on April 6th, and I was supposed to go back to work as normal and hopefully put all of the breast cancer behind me. Unfortunately, that's not the plan that life had for me. Unfortunately, because of the last 2 years having so many surgeries, the double mastectomy and reconstruction surgeries and a hysterectomy, I've utilized all of my sick time. And so I had just enough sick time for what was supposed to be, again, this last reconstruction surgery. And when I got the curveball of invasive breast cancer, I'm now faced with most likely not being able to work for the rest of the year and having no income at this time. My long-term care disability will kick in October, but I'm also going to have to start paying for Cobra in September. So it's just a whirlwind of different stressors coming at me at one time. I have the emotional stress of just trying to deal with the diagnosis and trying to deal with and process. I got the double mastectomy so that I wouldn't have to go through this, but now I'm faced with going through this. And so that's a lot to emotionally process. And then dealing with the financial stressors of how am I going to pay my bills? So am I going to have to wipe out the little bit of savings I have? So the finances are another stress. And also another stressor I have is with this diagnosis and the treatments that I have to get, it's taken away what I like to do in life, what I enjoy. I enjoy working out. I enjoy being able to travel. I'm a flight attendant. I'm used to being on the go. And that has been something that has been difficult to deal with because now I'm faced with being at home, not being able to go run like I like to run, not being able to go lift weights like I like to lift weights, not being able to even go swimming, because of the surgeries and not being able to get the incisions wet. Looking on social media, I've noticed recently that it's probably best for me to not be on social media as much because what I'm seeing is all of those things and adventures and concerts and flight attendants that are going to all these wonderful places. And unfortunately, at this time of my life, I can't do that. So part of what I enjoy and who I am has been taken away from me. So it's a lot of different stressors and a lot of different things going on all at one time. But yet I'm still trying to be positive and say, I'm going to get through this. I've always said from the beginning that no matter what happens or no matter how I feel, I'm always going to try to speak positive. Because I know with my faith at the end of the day, God has a plan and purpose for everything that happens. It might not feel like it at the moment. I know He's not going to leave me. He's not going to forsake me. And I believe He's going to carry me through when those moments where I don't even feel like I have the strength to go on. So I always try to be positive because being negative and dwelling on those negative thoughts and what I can't do and I can't work. Obviously those stressors are still there. I'm not going to say I'm this magical person that all of those things are poof, gone, because that's very unrealistic. And I'm still in my flesh here. I'm a human. And so those are concerns, but I try to just do things daily that feed the positivity.
Yeah, I could see how that would be so important that you need to protect your energy, on all levels, spiritual, physical, mental, all of that.
Yeah.
So let's go over some common causes. I know you guys did a lot of research on this. So let's go over some common causes of stress that affect our daily lives.
Some common types of stress that we have work stress, of course, overthinking, stress because of a lack of sleep, financial stress, busyness, being too busy, environmental stress, being in toxic relationships, whether that's friendships or romantic relationships. And
and abusers and toxic relationships, they put us in a chronic fight or flight. So after years, it just reaps havoc on our health. It just creates cancer, autoimmune disease, sickness, all kinds of illness. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah, and I struggle with lack of sleep. So, you read it all the time, and the more you read about it, the more it stresses you out. You're like, I really, really need to get my sleep. It's really important, but it is a struggle of mine too.
Yeah. And I feel like we live in a society today where we don't really foster self-care and getting enough sleep and taking care of yourself. We live in a world where it's busy, busy, busy. Go, go, go.
Right.
Fast food. Let's grab this on the way to do this.
Oh, yeah.
And how much can I pack into one day? And I don't think that we realize how much we actually attribute to our own stress.
Yeah.
Because we live in a world where this is normal. What do you mean? Why are you stressed out? It's normal.
Yeah, we don't allow enough margin for just to have a time of rest or do yoga or to just sit and meditate.
Yeah, there's short-term stress, which is kind of what I'm going through right now. My son bought a house and we're rehabbing the whole thing and it's got to be done by Friday. And I've been driving around and I've been doing so many things that I'll forget to go to the bathroom. I forget to eat. I'm like, I have to go to the bathroom. I don't have time to do that. Like, oh, there it is right there. You know, it's been that crazy of short-term stress. So we all have it. I'm sure we all go through that, but it's been really crazy for me lately. And then there's long-term chronic stress. And that's what abuse victims like myself in the chronic fight or flight after years and years of abuse go through. So the short-term stress is everybody has. You shouldn't have long-term chronic stress. I mean, but we do when we're abused. But the short-term stress, we all have it.
Yeah. And for going back to the overthinking, I literally, I'm a master overthinker.
Me too.
So I create, again, sometimes we create our own stress. Sometimes it's environmental factors, work or people around us or situations, but I can literally think myself into a hole. And it's why do we do that?
So does she.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
And I start
totally.
to do it, and then I have to talk myself out of doing it. So I catch myself doing it.
Yeah.
And I've been able to stop myself somehow, but I'll be like,
oh, I know. I
where's
make
this
things
going?
worse than they even are because, it's
you
easy
create
to do
a
that.
scenario in your head where you're like, how did I just create this whole scenario, this whole scene that literally in my head, I visually see this.
Yeah.
That it never happens. Why did you just you wasted your time, you wasted your energy. And
I read something that said something like you're suffering twice because you're worrying about something that's not going to happen and which probably causes it to happen.
Yes. Or you worry about somebody reacted in a way and you assumed something and you're worried about, oh no, what did that person, and meanwhile, every time I do that, I go, you know what? That's probably not even happen. Just wait and don't think about it again. And it never is.
Yeah.
It never is.
You're
They're totally
assuming what they thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They weren't even, it wasn't even that.
Are they
were
mad
just-
at me or they,
Like,
we make assumptions
I do
about
that
people.
and I have to stop myself. Nope.
Yeah.
Don't go
because
there.
you don't know. So it doesn't,
don't even worry
doesn't
about
help
it.
any to
Yeah.
sit and do
I know
that.
one big thing to combat that is, I know they say, oh, you shouldn't talk to yourself, but honestly, self-talk.
Oh, I do.
Self-talk helps. And we'll obviously talk about that later, ways to cope with our stress, but
Yeah.
Okay. So according to an article from the Stanford Center for Integrative Medicine by Mark Doolittle, PhD, on the effects of stress and illness, health is becoming increasingly recognized as a balance of many parts, physical and environmental factors, emotional and psychological states, nutritional habits, and exercise patterns. As part of that balance, the role of stress is well established as a cause of a broad range of disorders.
For example, it is now generally acknowledged that for heart disease, the nation's leading cause of death, emotional stress is a major risk factor. Most standard medical textbooks attribute anywhere from 50 to 80% of all disease to stress-related origins.
many researchers have found that chronic stress can wear down our body's defenses, lower our immune response, and make us more vulnerable to all sicknesses, including cancer. What is important is that the reduction of stress may very well improve chances of recovery, improve quality of life, and allow us a greater opportunity to participate in our total treatment. Stress is only one element of mind-body balance that determines your well-being. People assume stress only affects us mentally, but research has shown that stress affects every part of the body. And going over some of the physical interventions, particularly in my case, in my medical case, I'm going through chemotherapy, I've had surgery, I'm going to be having radiation. A lot of that draws attention away from the emotional aspect. There is a lack of tools in dealing with stress, which makes us rely on the medical interventions only. And I'm very happy to say that I go to Mayo Clinic here in Arizona, and they have been very good at recognizing that there is an emotional aspect to this illness. I'm diagnosed with cancer. I'm going through chemo. I'm going to be going through radiation. All of the physicians and nurses have been very good about genuinely asking, how is my emotional health? Like, I had a nurse literally look at me and say, seriously, how are you doing? And I mean, this is a physical disease, but we know that this is way more than physical.
Yeah.
And they've provided me with resources, whether it be a social worker, support groups, etc. So I'm glad that that's starting to be recognized more. And we know that obviously you have to have the physical medical interventions of chemo and surgery and radiation, but we can't neglect the emotional aspect of it, because if you're not emotionally healthy, you're actually feeding the disease more. And that's what I've always thought with my stress. Like, even in articles that I've read over the years, I always had a high stress job. I worked in mental health, drug and alcohol, community mental health, locked facilities, and I was always a go, go, go. And so I never stopped. So I feel like my stress level attributed to my disease, on top of me also having a genetic disposition where I do carry one of the breast cancer genes, and also having a family history of breast cancer. So I know that I can't prove that my stress directly attributed to my cancer, but it makes sense because stress wears down your body and you lower your immune system. So when you're constant stress, like I was most of my life, actually, I just celebrated my 6-year anniversary at Southwest. So I've been with Southwest for 6 years. For a year before that, I was with another airline. But so 7 years I've been a flight attendant, and it's been wonderful for me because it's a job where I love it. I'm interacting with people, but when I get off the plane, I'm done. And my previous career, it wasn't like that. You were never done. It was pagers, cell phones, calls, and I don't have the ability to let things roll off. I just don't have that personality. It's almost like you care too much. And so my personality, unfortunately, in that previous career, it was very high stress. And I do believe that that partially could have attributed to my diagnosis as well.
Yeah. Yeah. In my previous jobs, I let it roll off, because I couldn't take it with me. I would have never been able to stay there that long. But with the nonprofit, I found it at the beginning much harder to let it roll off. And I had to learn how to do that because I was carrying other people's stuff with me. Yeah. But also with abuse victims, it's similar to what she's saying. It's emotional. It's years and years of that emotional, physical, any type of abuse where you're constantly in fight or flight, and just your adrenals are just burning out. And that just causes sickness, disease, cancer, everything. And that's how I ended up with my autoimmune disease. So if you're new to listening to the podcast, I have Hashimoto's disease from being abused for 22 years, physically, spiritually, verbally. So it causes all kinds of sickness and disease. So that's why we're talking about toxic relationships today. They're not good for you.
Yeah. And I struggle with migraines, and I know I'm always researching because my migraines came back because for my job being so stressful, which is why I got a new job, which is a little stressful right now because it's always stressful when you're learning everything. But I know I've tried everything that I can think of, but I know one thing that I had looked into, there's a thing called Curable, and they talk a lot about even what you say to yourself. Like when you have a bad migraine, you're like, oh, this is awful. Like that actually makes it worse. There's actually science that shows like if you can just say something even kind of positive, like, okay, this is going to pass or something like that. So when I get a migraine now, I try not to like say things like that.
I believe that.
We talked about that later in that book.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that in reviewing some of the articles that we've looked at in the role of stress, recent exploration of the role of stress and emotions in illnesses, including cancer, led by the work of Lawrence Lachon, has new interest. A quarter century ago, Lachon studied the lives of more than 500, this happened to be cancer patients, many of whom he worked with in psychotherapy. He found a distinct emotional life history pattern in 76% of the cancer patients. But the same pattern appeared in only 10% of the control group that did not have cancer. And I thought that this was so interesting because he's doing this study with cancer patients, working with them in psychotherapy and the role of stress in their life events. And I've always believed that life events, and whether it be a history of child abuse or physical abuse in your marriage, anything, it definitely attributes to your stress level. And I believe that that can attribute to diseases. And there were 4 distinct features in that study that LaShawn did. And a person's childhood was marked by extreme difficulty, establishing a warm, satisfying relationships, usually because of a death of a parent, a divorce, or chronic conflict, or prolonged separation from one or both of their parents. So that parent-child relationship and not being able to establish that warmth. I mean, we all know that we all know, the 3 of us sitting here, we know because of everything that definitely affects you. And I think people don't realize how much your past and the relationships, even how you were brought up by your mom, by your dad, and the affection that you were shown or the lack of affection you were shown, and how that can totally affect you later on in life. And obviously the study is showing that it did affect the 76% of people. And another feature that they found is that in adulthood, a person found strength and meaning in a relationship or career and poured out a great deal of energy into that source. And we see that so often. Sometimes people are just workaholics and that's all they do is work, or you get into a relationship and your whole life is that relationship. They find value and validation in that relationship, which always bothers me so bad. There's one thing that people say a lot that kind of
I know what you're going to say. I know what you're going to say.
I can't say when people say, "Oh, you complete me." I can't. That's like a pet peeve of mine. Nobody should complete you, but the Lord.
It's a romantic notion, but it's not. It's not really healthy.
No one else should complete you. If you don't already feel complete in and of yourself, then there's something you need to take a look at and something you need to work on about yourself, because people can enhance you.
Yeah, but they shouldn't completely. If you're looking for somebody to complete you, you're starting off on the wrong foot.
Yeah, definitely. Number 3 that they found in this study was when the key source was removed, key source of person or work, through death, divorce, delusionment, retirement, and the childhood wound reopened, the person again experienced that same sense of loss, despair, hopelessness, helplessness, which I love that right there, because that whole childhood wound, I think we all have childhood wounds, and we are who we are today because of what we went through, but we all have childhood wounds and things that trigger us, and sometimes we don't even realize it until, like they're saying here, if you're a workaholic and all you've known is work, and that's your priority, and then you're faced with retirement, you're going to experience a definite loss. And like, how do you even cope with this? How do you deal with this? Because then you're opening up that childhood wound of that loss, or not having that connection, because all you were doing is working. Yeah. And number 4 on the study they have is feelings, especially negative ones like anger, hurt, disappointment, constantly bottling your feelings up. Others view the person as too good to be true, superficial saint-like quality. It's a reflection of a deeper inability to express hostility and overcompensation of feelings and unworthiness. I certainly know that I, for one, and I know I've talked about this on some of the other podcasts, I have struggled with low self-esteem and feelings of abandonment and a lot of childhood wounds, so to speak, for years. So I definitely believe in that. It's too good to be true. If I'm in a relationship and they're being too nice to me, I'm like, okay, what's wrong? When's it going to go wrong? You're like waiting for something to go wrong.
Instead of enjoying it.
Instead of just enjoying, well, you deserve this. You don't have to believe the negativity, that you learn to believe throughout your life because of negative past experience that happened to you.
Or if you had a lot of chaos in your past, it's hard. You don't realize that you almost want that. And when you don't have chaos, you're like, oh, this feels weird.
Yes. Yeah. It doesn't feel normal.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we crave what we're used to, even if it's not healthy.
I don't know. I read that in a completely different way. And we were researching that. I was like, okay, so I struggle with anger, hurt, disappointment, crying. I've been crying more lately since that last round of EMDR. But I'm like, is everything bottled up? And because I'm not a hostile person, and I definitely feel unworthy and struggle with all that. And I read it like in a whole different way than you.
Well, it could be too, because when you start working in therapy and you start digging deeper into healing those childhood wounds and healing the issues that you've had, that really, it's hard. I mean, going to therapy and facing, the things that none of us want to face.
Oh yeah. When my EMDR therapist was like, you have emotions now. I don't even know what I have them now. And I was like crying a couple days ago and woke up crying, and I didn't even understand why yet though. Like I still can't. Then I read this one and I go, oh no. Like
It's progress.
You guys
Look at it as a good sign.
Yes.
I looked at it as like oh no, I don't want to be a superficial saint. Like I just want to be, real, but I don't know. I can't process any of it still, but I'm starting to, and I'm starting to feel things. I'm like, oh my gosh, I felt really hurt. It was something I felt really hurt about. And then I was like, oh, I cried because I felt hurt. Like,
yeah, it's good. You can see it as a good
pretty
sign.
bad when, yeah. And I'm sure a lot of our abuse victims have similar to me, just how messed up I am. But I'm doing so much better. Like, it's been years.
You're not messed up. You're a work in progress.
Yeah. I feel healthy. I feel
sense.
happy. Like, after that, I have had breakthrough. I've had breakthrough now. I'm like, I have emotion. What do I do with this?
I think it's an ongoing process. I mean, there's a podcast called The Place We Find Ourselves where he talks a lot about your childhood wounds. And to me, it's just this ongoing thing. It's never completely healed. You know, you always have to kind of be aware of it. It's not like you have to work on it every day, but
And I do get angry. I told my son to give my ex and his wife the middle finger the other day. He got so mad. I'm like, see, I'm angry. Like,
She sounded nice even saying that.
it made me mad that he's with his new wife that's as old as my kids to the same place that was a place we went. And it just made me angry. I'm like, it was just like I was a replacement. I just got replaced because I wasn't going to wait on him anymore.
Well, that's just you recognizing that's an area that you still need some healing in.
right.
That's all.
Right.
And it's okay to be angry.
That's all.
I think it was good to feel angry because I hadn't felt angry. I felt nothing.
Right.
I felt like
a normal
survival.
emotion
Yeah, it was
in your
just surviving.
circumstance.
Yeah.
So in LaShawn's study, it's important to understand that the research identifies emotions as only one possible factor to the development of the cancer patients that he had in that study. So obviously, like we said earlier, there's many different factors. He just happened to do a study saying that our emotions definitely play a part in disease, including cancer.
Yeah. So do you think if I put that part about the middle finger on the podcast, that it's a Christian podcast, they might not like
It's you being real. I like it. I like it. I mean,
I don't care. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm putting it on there.
Karen and I had touched on this already. Some research suggests that there is a positive role for emotions in many illnesses, including cancer. Having an attitude of hopelessness and hopelessness certainly can hurt a person's chances for their health or recovery versus having an attitude of determination, hope, and fighting back. Obviously, that can lead to a positive outcome. It's unhealthy to bottle up your emotions. It can create a dangerous load of chronic stress. Learning to let go can reduce that burden and its risk. And having a comprehensive approach to illness, including cancer, it includes dealing with emotion and stress-related aspects of the disease. Like I said earlier, I like that at Mayo, they're not just asking me about the physical. Obviously, we know we're addressing the physical. They're asking me about the emotional stress-related aspects of the disease and also adding counseling and stress reduction therapies to traditional medical care. It's becoming more common.
Yeah. Yeah. And counseling it's like having a balanced approach to your life. It's like having a well-rounded healing. Like, it isn't just one thing that's going to heal you. So therapy is just one aspect of it. And I've gone through a lot of therapy, and a lot of times we interview people, so we don't have a whole lot of time to talk about our journey. We're just responding to what they're saying. And there was a time where I retired from my job and I took 18 months off just to get out of fight or flight and just heal. And I spent all that time meditating and de-stressing and learning that my new normal was calm. But what that ended up doing, I went to our other therapist and she said to me, that was during COVID, so it was an online appointment. And she said, I was at the point, I went too extreme to the other end where I didn't want to deal with anything ever, like have absolutely no stress at all. And she said to me, there's healthy stress, Brenda. There's normal life things you've got to do, and there's going to be healthy stress. You can't avoid all of it. And that was a real wake up call to me, like, I'm not functioning. I was barely functioning and people didn't know. I'm like, I can barely get up. And that's why I'd be late for church, like super late. Sometimes I still am, but I'm like, I'm glad that I just made it here. That was a big deal for me at that time to even get out of the house and get somewhere. But then it got to the point where I kept going to EMDR and doing more therapy I'm so much healthier now. Now I'm like super productive. I'm like at the opposite extreme. So Yeah, there's got to be a balance.
Yeah, because like you said, we can't eliminate all stress from our lives. Don't we wish we could? Wave that magic wand or say that perfect prayer. But I think it's in how through some of it might be therapy, counseling, whatever self-care techniques we use, it's how you respond to the stress. Because sometimes there's a stressful situation, but we make it worse by how we respond. Because I know personally, I can be that person. Yeah. I like the overthinking. Like if a stressful situation comes, like I'll think 10 different other things that aren't even occurring. And, what if they say this? What if they think that? What if they're mad at me? None of that even occurred. Like, you're just making it worse. So it's how we respond and learn to respond through things like therapy. Yeah. That I think are important.
I think one key thing that I started to recognize is that my stress level's too high is when I start not liking myself. Like when I see it's so high that I don't even like myself anymore. Like that's a clear sign. Like I'm like, wait a minute, this isn't me. Yeah. So when it kind of turns you into a person you don't want to be, I know that sounds weird, but you'll notice the next time you'll be like, wait a minute, I didn't want to be that way. Since this is a podcast against abuse and a nonprofit to help people heal from abuse, we just want to make sure we get into what happens when you're abused and what happens to your stress level. So most research is focused on the fight or flight response that the body has to threat, in which the body is subjected to repeated arousal. The fight or flight response has been shown to produce a wide variety of mental and physical changes. For instance, when a car swerves towards us on the highway, we may consciously feel afraid, anxious, and angry. Internally, our body is reverberating from head to toe with all the aspects of the stress response. A part of the brain called the hypothalamus stimulates the pituitary gland, which in turn activates the thyroid and adrenal glands, which quickly flood the bloodstream with adrenaline, cortisone, and other stress hormones. The entire body is affected. Our heart rate increases, blood pressure rises, breathing becomes faster, body muscles tighten, facial muscles constrict, pupils dilate, hearing becomes sharper, sugars secreted into the bloodstream, blood flows into the brain and muscles and away from the stomach and intestines. The bowels and bladder relax, and brainwave activity quickens. Palms sweat, and hands and feet become colder as blood flows away from the skin to the brain and the muscles. So imagine being in that constantly. So in addition to its usefulness for physical survival, the fight or flight response carries with it an emotional safety valve by discharging internal tension. Either in a physical struggle or escape, the body first releases the built-up pressure, then eventually goes to post-stress, the letdown phase, and finally returns to a neutral, non-stress state. However, what worked in other societies or times often does not work in ours. Recent research has shown that the fight or flight response can, ironically, become a threat to our health and survival. The nature of civilization makes this response inappropriate in many situations. We therefore stifle those responses for the sake of personal survival and social harmony. But as the number of similarly charged situations increases and tension is not discharged, a state of chronic stress can develop, with the risk of resulting health problems. It's not difficult to understand how modern life increases the chances for arousal of the stress syndrome. COVID, living conditions becoming more crowded and noisy and polluted, the pace of intensity of life increasing, which we talked about. Mass media reminds us constantly of deaths, injuries, so all the news. Threats around us, sources of information proliferate and then become increasingly confusing. When the world around us becomes increasingly stressful, the tendency is for the fight or flight response to be chronically activated. If the body's unable to regularly let down, it tends not to swing back to its neutral non-stress point, and it becomes pulled more and more towards chronic stress response. The result is a slowly rising level of internal pressure. So this is what happens to abuse victims. I think with COVID, a lot of people went through years of this and are probably just coming down from it now, but you saw how people were acting during COVID. Yeah. But as abuse victims, that's what causes the disease, and it causes such adrenal fatigue and sickness and disease. So that was explained really well. I like that article, how they explain that to our listeners.
Some researchers have attempted to clarify to what degree stressful life events are related to sickness.
Stay tuned for next week's part 2. You don't want to miss it.
Thanks for tuning in to Hanging On to Hope. Check out our website, hangingontohope.org. There are resources on there, and if you would like to donate or volunteer, you can do that through our website. We are a brand new nonprofit, so we appreciate any and all support. And we thank you for listening, and until next time, keep hanging on to hope. We are evidence that there is hope and healing for you, and our passion is to help you find it too. So thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for listening, everyone.